this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. Welcome to the Heart of Storytelling podcast. If you're a regular listener, you'll notice that I've been absent for a couple of weeks. After doing 6 months of weekly episodes, I needed a break. And particularly after my trip to Emerson College and all of the enormous work that I did there, I needed some respite from that. It doesn't mean that I want the podcast to stop. I do love speaking to interviewees, but it might not be every week now. I've got a few other responsibilities in my life, and it just means that you might just get them a bit more sporadically than once a week, and I apologise deeply for that. But I will try and get them to you as soon as I can. I've got a huge list of people I would like to interview, and I will get to them eventually, but it might just not be on a weekly basis from now on. This week I spoke with Tim Sheppard, who is in England, and Tim was very, very generous with his knowledge and wisdom about storytelling, about fairy tales, about deep spirituality in symbolism in stories, about building community, and so many other things. This is a really special interview, and I hope that you enjoy this with Tim. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking to Tim Sheppard, who is in the UK. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast. Can you tell me how you got started in storytelling and your journey, where you come from and where you are now?
Well, it was a very odd start, I have to say. I was living in Bristol in the southwest of England, where I still am. And by chance, one of the world's most progressive, brilliant circus schools started off just near me. And I went along to have a look. And it was like a kindergarten for adults. It was amazing. There was unicycles and trapezes and juggling equipment. And so I just plunged in and thought, well, this is great. And I didn't have a performing bone in my body. I was shy. I was rather sensitive. I didn't like being observed. But I joined in this training, which was phenomenal. It was one of the best performance training schools really in the world. I had a girlfriend at the time who went to a 3-year drama degree course, and she said she learned less in that than in 1 week of coming to full-time, which was the name of school. And we were all very foolish. We just played and played and did lots of stuff. It was very exciting, but it drew me out of myself. And one of the things we learned out of the many skills was storytelling, which I didn't have on my radar at all at the time. And I didn't then think that's what I wanted to do. But after I did lots of circusy things and performed and learned to love it, I realized that what they'd been training us in was the kind of era of the narrative circus. It was a kind of circus theatre revolution that was happening, and it gave rise to all the other sort of famous circus acts that came after that. Before it had all been traditional circus, very different. So we got given all sorts of skills that we combined together, and it all came down to this idea of story running through what we were doing, demonstrating, using skills and so on. But at the heart of it was this story. And quite a few of my colleagues at that time went on later to become storytellers because they'd had such good training in what it meant, how to be a storyteller. And we had amazing training methods, very playful, very improvisational. Anyway, so I got into storytelling partly because of that, and partly because a friend of mine came along a little while later, and he'd been to one of the first storytelling festivals here in Britain. And he said, "This is amazing." And he'd heard that I'd done this little bit in what my training was. He said, "Can you teach me?" And so I put together a little training course using the methods that I knew, which were very collaborative and improvisational. And therefore, I taught him and a few people. And that became a course that I ran for kind of 30 years. And it was in how to be a storyteller rather than how to do storytelling, really.
Mm.
I always felt that came first. You
Mm.
can, you can learn stories, you can craft stories, but if you don't know how to be a storyteller as you are, you feel in yourself, in your presence, relating to people, being able to hold an audience, reveal yourself, be intimate in that sort of way that storytellers do,
Mm.
then learning a story really well won't get you better at those things.
Mm.
That's what I've always taught people. So I started storytelling by teaching people actually before doing it, which the classic teacher's thing. If you don't know how to do, teach it. But I did go on to form out of my classes. I formed a performance group, and because they were all beginners, and there wasn't much storytelling around at the time in this country, there was a little bit, but I hadn't met any. Um, we performed as a kind of collaborative group, and I invented this style of physical theatre and improvisational performance along with storytelling. And
Mm.
this meant that these not very experienced storytellers could make a really good show that was great to watch.
Mm.
And they had support if then anything went wrong with the story. Then it didn't matter because there was other people joining in. And so fundamentally, I described it as one storyteller and a bunch of idiots trying to get in the way. Uh, and that's how we did, but we circulated who was the storyteller. And it was an enormous fun thing to do, very popular. We got really good reviews and everything. And I performed as part of that group. And that's what happened to me before I actually really found the storytelling scene. And
Mm.
there was, festival starting up, and we had the Society for Storytelling, which had started. And so I started to meet people then. But I did get in through a very different area, and my skill wasn't in theatre, but it included some of the sort of very hardcore inner training from that
Mm.
area, so that I could become, well, I could teach and become somebody who sort of really held the room and did all those things that a lot of storytellers don't get taught,
Mm.
without turning it into an acting performance,
Mm.
which some actors come into storytelling and think, oh, this is easy. This is just like a monologue. I
Mm.
can do, and it's not that.
No, I mean, I think that there's a line there between acting and storytelling. Um, how much is too much? Because some of the best storytellers I've ever seen just sit and talk, and they don't use their hands. The words come out of their mouth, and you're taken somewhere amazing. But yeah, and I've seen some others who are flowery, and their hands are everywhere, and there's a line between storytelling and acting. Can you talk to that a little bit? Because I don't have a lot of experience in acting, and yeah.
No, well, and actors shouldn't fling their arms around wildly either, particularly. But yes, um, it is very difficult. I mean, I've been in conversation with many storytellers before, saying, "Okay, what is the difference?" And it's
Mm.
really hard to define.
Mm.
But acting is more about being observed and embodying a character, and it's about putting out more than storytelling is.
Mm.
But you should be aware whenever you have this kind of conversation that there are different styles of acting, and really good acting
Mm.
is closer to storytelling.
Mm.
There's plenty of actors that aren't quite that good, and they do
Mm.
put on a show. But yeah, it's very, very difficult to define. Storytelling really is about um, being with your audience and being part of the story so that they are part of the story as well. That's not necessarily completely different to acting, but it is a complete informality
Mm.
where we are in this together,
Mm.
um, rather than me showing something to you.
Mm.
Uh, but
I
some
guess, yeah.
storytellers do it like that too, as well. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I guess it's like when the fourth wall is broken in the theatre, you then get to be part of whatever's going on stage. You're not separate from it.
yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that. And so what sort of stories do you like to tell, or what area do you sort of zone into for your stories?
Well, I've always been drawn to the very deep fairy tales, the wonder tales. Um, And it's tricky because a lot of storytelling opportunities, especially the public groups where you come and, once a month come and join things, they often have a time limit,
Mm.
which is a lot less than a fairy tale.
Mm.
So it's quite tricky. There's not so much opportunity, but I really do love them. And I've been doing a lot of research into them lately because they are very profound, actually, and a lot more profound than people think. It's not just about kind of Jungian symbols or Freudian development or whatever. There is, well, I mean, I could go on for an hour about this because I've been delving deep into it. But I do love those tales, and I love tales which are um, I like a mixture, really. I think with a storytelling show, it's great to have a mixture where you're switching things around. There's a clever tale, there's a short tale, there's a funny tale, there's a deep tale, I do like the deep tales. And quite a lot of them are longer, but not all.
Mm.
But I haven't really kept myself to one particular area or culture. I do sort of pick up stories from around the place. But that in itself is an amazing journey because we have in Britain quite a strong culture of mythology and a lot of folk tales. I mean, I've got behind me like a 4-volume set of British folk tales. That's it's a very famous collection, but they're big volumes, and that's good. It says something to our culture. But if you look deep into it, quite a lot of those Celtic tales, at least, made their way here somehow from India,
Yes.
which is right the way across the world. And we
Yeah.
have this kind of uh, Indo-European sort of flow of culture that happened in very ancient times. Nobody really knows quite how,
Mm.
uh, but it's there. And in some of the Irish mythology, you've got all these kind of the stories of the ancient Irish, and they got the same names as the same stories of uh, Indian
Yeah,
mythology.
Sanskrit. Yeah, and the language is similar too. So yeah, I read a book that had the similarity in language and in story between the
Mhm.
Sanskrit and the Celtic, and I find that fascinating myself. I too dive deep into the history of story and find fairy tales and the origins of those very, very interesting. Do you have a favorite fairy tale, which is like asking your favorite child, but do you have a favorite or like a favorite motif or anything that you like? So for example, I like tales where there's a little bit of magic, but the heroine goes through and defeats the dragon or whatever. So there's a there's a heroine who goes through trials, I guess. That's my
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I guess that accounts for quite a lot of fairy tales, really.
Yeah.
But yes, well, it's quite tricky because for the last couple of years, I've been really researching individual tales deeply. I belong to a group which discusses the Grimm's fairy tales. We
Mm.
focus on one at a time, and then I go into that research and find, gosh, there's so many connections, and the symbolism is a particular thing that I'm interested in,
Mm.
which makes every tale much more meaningful.
Mm.
And so it's not so much about the surface of the tale, it's that kind of inner pattern. But the pattern is quite similar with a lot of them. So seeing that journey of the soul, really, that it's about, come out in slightly different expressions, but so much the same. I think one of my favorites, although not to tell, but my favorite is Cupid and Psyche, which is a very kind of archetypal
Yeah.
avatar, really, of many, many fairy tales.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was put down kind of 2000 years ago in writing, but there is evidence that it was already, around, but it got really refined at that time, according to somebody who really understood the ancient Greek mysteries, which was where people were invited in to experience the presence of the divine, to be initiated into the mysteries of the divine. And that was impossible to explain to anyone. So, because that sort of experience comes above simple knowledge and thought, it is something deeper. So they would take people through an experience of the divine, and that was using mythology to kind of shape the experience. But the mythology, as they understood it, was always a message. It was always an instruction, explaining profound ideas, philosophical ideas, and spiritual reality, which was not possible to talk about with ordinary everyday language. So they used it. And that myth also kind of evolved into fairy tale as a more kind of neat form, but also with a message. And Cupid and Psyche is really at the bridge between those. But it's one of the most perfect kind of complete stories that all of the rest of the stories we have kind of come from, and they're kind of less versions of it in some ways. So it was really quite astounding, and a lot of profound meaning in it if you really want to go into how the Greeks and the Romans saw it. That's been my sort of journey for the last couple of years. I've been reading all the ancient Greek philosophers and commentators, and they're saying things that, like, what is myth for? And the modern people and academics say, oh, myth is this and that. And the people who actually made them and used them will say, don't be ridiculous. There's nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
So I've been really reveling in those things and picking out why it is all those strange things get into the fairy tales. And they said right back 2000 years ago, if there's a strange thing in a story, it's a message. They actually said this, how do you interpret myths and so on, and the fairy tales that come from them? You look for those odd things that don't have to be there, that are a bit unusual, because they're calling your attention. They're saying, look at this. This means something, otherwise it wouldn't be there. What is that? And you've got to delve into that. But you do have to know the language of symbolism, which is quite an education in itself.
Yes, it is.
It's not Jungian
No.
things from,
Yeah. I have struggled with the Jungian, with the fairy tales, looking at that, because like you, I've ended up going as far back as I possibly can and finding Cupid and Psyche and finding the Epic of Gilgamesh and Anna, and you find these rich myths from ancient times that have been written down, and then there's all the ones that have never been written down, and then you see threads of them in the fairy tales, and it's just like east of the sun, west of the moon. He's basically Cupid and Psyche, and there's just this beauty in that. The stories have, that's for, like, that one has shifted into east of the sun, west of the moon, but it has the symbolism and the things that were important for people there. So I think we share a love of very similar things, for sure. So yeah, I think that's a great choice of a favorite fairy tale, because then that has its little wings everywhere else into so many others. One of the things that I come up against, even before this, was the censorship of fairy tales and the people not really understanding the depth that they have, and they're looking at it and they go, well, this is not a feminist tale, or this is a violent tale. And I always find it hard to explain to people, well, actually, you've got to look deeper to find what the story's about. Do you find that that's the same in your experience with fairy tales? Are people open to the fairy tales as they were, or as you tell them, or do they need them to be sanitized?
Oh gosh, don't sanitize them. That you are preserving ancient wisdom, even if you aren't interested in it or don't see it.
Mm,
Um, you shouldn't tell it. And that's part of the oral tradition of
mm,
not changing the stories. And I
mm,
know that in some places people feel, oh, you've got to change the stories to make it yours
mm,
and to make it your possession. That's not what the oral storytelling tradition is about. Not
mm,
at all. The old kind of apprenticeship would be that the young person listens to the master, mistress, whatever, telling the story and would repeat it really accurately. And there was a demand for it to be really properly done. And that went on for a long time. But the young person wanted to change the story, wanted to tell it their own way, that sort of express it
mm,
in their personality and so on. But if, eventually they got to the point where they had mastered the art of storytelling, and then they no longer wanted to change the story
mm,
because they did it and
mm,
they felt it and they realized that it had been refined over hundreds of generations, probably, into something that was really not worth changing. And of course, in that process, traditionally, a storyteller would learn something about the meaning and the symbolism, although
mm,
that varies very much across cultures. Somebody may not be taught that deeply.
mm,
But I remember seeing, a kind of critical moment for me was in the Beyond the Border Storytelling Festival, which happens in Wales, not very far from me. And it's in its early days, they were bringing in bardic storytellers from ancient traditions. Um, the bards were people who I mean, it's a word that's a Celtic word, and each different country has their own word for something similar. And
mm,
I've seen a number of them, and they are incredible people with incredible telling. I mean, it's like on a different planet
mm,
from a good storyteller. Um, and they have a presence and a wisdom and all sorts of things. I mean, I could tell you so many stories about them, but I saw the Pandvani, who are a kind of nomadic race from central India, and they just travel around and they have one story, and that's the Mahabharata,
mm,
which is the kind of most sacred epic of India. And it is basically scripture. Uh, there's Joseph Campbell said when he was asked what is mythology, he said other people's religion. You know, and so they went around telling the Mahabharata, but you can buy the Mahabharata in a book.
mm,
It's a big one, but it was only written down. Now I'm not sure, and I don't think anyone quite knows exactly when, but we're talking about a couple of millennia ago.
mm.
Um, but before that, there was an oral Mahabharata, and that is what they tell. They don't tell it from the book. They
Oh,
tell the oral, and it's been there forever. There's some evidence because of things that it mentions that never don't exist anymore. Some evidence it goes back maybe 9,000 years or
wow,
more,
wow.
up back to the last ice age, perhaps.
Mm,
And who knows? I mean, who knows where things started? But uh, it is something that they take very seriously.
mm,
So I saw a girl. She was 16 at the time. She was called Ritu Verma, and she was the first person in this tradition as a girl to be telling. All of it was male before, but this master had to pass it on, and he only had a girl, no
mm,
sons. So she was this, and she was a slight, tiny girl that had a voice that could kill a cow at 100 paces. She would tell the story with her magical long-handled lute in her hand, which was a kind of almost like a magical weapon that she would use for gestures and so on. And she would chant the story, a sentence or so, and then her companion behind her, she had one companion along with lots of musicians who would say acha, and that means in India, yes, okay, that's good.
Mm.
And basically, she had to say it right for him to be able to say, yeah, you got it right.
Wow.
Every sentence, every sentence. And so that story was preserved for thousands of years the same. It's scripture. It has
Mm.
to be.
Mm.
And so there is that oral tradition all over the world which has a similar sort of thing, that these stories are sacred in some way. You can't mess around with them.
Mm.
Even the kind of silly little folk tales can
Mm.
be sort of bits of those sacred tales that have lost a
Mm.
bit of their form. So I'm sort of all in favor of really learning what you've got before you start changing it to,
Changing.
especially to modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
And I think in Europe we have a lot less sensitivity than they have in America, where they've got to be, nobody must say anything that's slightly worrying. Whereas
Mm.
here we just tell the tales, and some of them are quite dark, some of them are quite
Mm.
fine. Yeah, they're not meant to be for children in the first
No,
place.
no, they're not.
Children can cope anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And so have you had, I mean, that sounds like a really special experience seeing that
Mm.
delivered. Have you had any other, when you're telling, have you had some great experiences yourself in telling stories?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's so many really. I can't say that there's any sort of one thing that sticks out as a whole storytelling session, but little moments. I really love where people are just completely immersed and you can hear a pin drop and they got their mouth open and they kind of don't know where they are, what's going on. I really love that. But you don't even need a story to start that. I used to I remember I I did a presentation to a load of kind of knowledge professionals, corporate sort of people involved in preserving knowledge of a culture in the company, And I said, look, I'll demonstrate why storytelling works and what it does. And I just looked at them at the beginning to gather them and to establish that kind of moment of magic. And it was a trick that I'd learned from my circus days, circus performance. Um, but I mean, it's not a trick really. It's a way of being, and
Mm.
you have to get it right. But I then went on to tell the story, and afterwards, this guy came up to me. He said, we were all sitting down and just kind of quite cynical and intellectual people, just kind of thinking, what is this stuff about storytelling? And then I don't know what happened. I kind of lost consciousness before you started. It's like I kind of woke up at the end and it's like, what did you do? Because I was watching you and you didn't do anything. How did you do that?
That's amazing.
I just love that kind of connection, but
Mm.
it has to emerge from yourself. You have to go there and you have to let people in as you're doing it. And then they're lost. They're with you. They can't defend themselves.
Well, I guess it's the magic
Into a
that you're
story.
creating, isn't it? You're
Yeah,
creating a space for that to exist, for that liminal dream space to exist for people who
yeah.
quite often don't have time for that.
And there are, the whole story trance is a thing that's been studied, it is a wonderful thing. I love those very dramatic moments in a story which kind of take people to a different level. It kind of reveal something that they're thinking, oh, it's about that.
Mm.
And that kind of, because taking people deeper, I think, is part of the main role of storytellers.
Mm,
We do need to raise people above their everyday lives,
mm,
to show themselves something about themselves and the story that they're not used to bothering to look at.
mm,
They may not be philosophers, they may not be immersed in the wisdom tradition, but it's there, and we can be the bearers of it, and we can just immerse people in it, and they think, "Ooh, I didn't know this was existing," and that's a good thing.
yeah, that is a great thing.
But that trance is essential. It happens first before people can be taken that deeply.
Mm,
I saw another bardic teller from Uzbekistan who has one story. His story takes 18 months to tell.
wow.
That's how long it is. He doesn't need any others, of course. And when he tells his story, chants it, and he sort of rocks, and the chanting is very repetitive, of course. Everyone goes into a trance, but so does he. And
Mm,
at the end, not of his story, but of the kind of the slot that he had, because
mm,
this again at Beyond the Border, his minder said, "Okay, stop." Nothing happened. Tapped him on the shoulder, nothing happened. Wobbled his shoulder, nothing happened. He still carried on chanting. And this woman had to take him by both shoulders and shake him until his head wobbled around. And
wow.
then gradually he emerged and said, "Oh, what's going on? Where am I?" That's the kind of trance that you need to tell the deepest
Mm,
stories.
yeah.
Tradition, you know.
Yes. Wow. That's that's really quite special, isn't it? That he was so deep in it that he needed someone to remove him from that space. It's incredible.
And
Which
that's
goes,
what happens.
yeah.
That's what happens with storytellers. A lot of people don't realize this, but you start a storyteller, start a story with once upon a time,
Mm,
or in a time before time, or long, long ago. All these kind of openers, which are very traditional, and those are the kind of boring ones. There's lots of much more sort of fancy ones, if you like. Um, those are the invocation that takes people into another world. They are
mm,
telling people you're not in the world anymore. You're in this mysterious place. And at the end, you have a similar thing, which
mm,
brings people back out. And that's a lot of people don't use that anymore, or don't realize
mm,
what it's, but it
mm,
really is taking people in and taking them back home safely.
mm. I'm hearing from you a real sense of spirituality with by the sounds of what you do and your understanding of story. So my big question for everyone is what is at the heart of storytelling and why do you think we need it today?
Yeah, it's quite hard to really put into words, of course, but something I've been doing is running World Storytelling Day every year. And as part of that, I have to kind of gather the world of storytellers to try and agree on what they're going to do, what they're going to focus on, what the theme is, and so on. And part of that, I say, look, as storytellers, we got this chance to give people inspiration, hope, and immerse them in wisdom. Um, that's a little kind of short version of what we as storytellers have got that other people want. The inspiration can come through stories of all kinds, of course, as long as they're appropriate to the moment and the person. Magic can happen. Hope comes through from stories being, you know, showing the ideal, showing justice, showing
Mm,
happiness. It can
mm,
bring people into that. But the wisdom, of course, as we've been talking about, is something that is hidden. You have to work for it a bit, but it sort of pulls at your heartstrings.
mm,
So that's really getting into the heart of what storytellers do. But I think a really key part of storytelling is that it creates community.
Mm.
And I mean that in the moment. By entering into this unique space and creating this space with people and drawing them in, we're not drawing them in to look at ourselves, but to live in the story that we are living in at the same time. So it's a shared situation, and that sharing and that shared imagination and the experience of a story that we now all know in the same way, this is what creates a sense of communal bonding and understanding. We've got a language, at least of one story now, feelings that went with it and everything. So as storytellers, well, I think we're trying to reduce the barriers, the social etiquette, all that kind of stuff, just to be human together. And that is incredibly valuable because in this world today, everyone's alienated, everyone's lonely. Yeah, there's so much that we are lacking from that old traditional style of living where everyone's sharing in each other's lives quite intimately. And there are drawbacks to that, of course, but we really do feel the lack of it, not necessarily consciously, but when you come to storytelling, that's, I think, one of the reasons why people say, "Oh, what's this about?" Because they feel this sort of intimacy that they'd not come across, not with strangers. So that unmediated way of just being human together in the same space, absolutely crucial. That really, I think, is the kind of dynamic at the heart of storytelling. But what do you do when you're in that space together? And that's the other part. The storyteller has to reveal meaning, take people into what is really important. And there's levels to that. Some of it's just everyday folk wisdom, some of it's more profound, some of it's just kind of enjoying yourself together. But what is revealed is, meant to be appropriate to the person, to the occasion. And that's part of the art of storytelling as well. But so taking people, dissolving the barriers, and then immersing them in something that's got real meaning. That's, I think, the heart of storytelling.
That was a really great answer. I really loved the thought and the dimensions of your response to that question. It was really beautiful. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was going to say, have you heard of the ladder to the moon? But it was a kind of a tradition that I heard about from Ben Haggerty, storyteller here. But he pointed out that this is a very universal phenomenon, really. That when people in a traditional culture get together at the end of the day, people come back from the fields or, whatever they're doing in a very kind of simple rural type situation. What they do is they greet each other and they say, "Hello, how are you?" And okay, that's very obvious. And then they'll move on to the next rung of the ladder, which is, and how's your family? How's everything going? Yeah, very well, thank you. And what's been going on in your family? And then there's little sort of stories, little anecdotes start to come out. And then what's been going on in the village? What's the news? What's the gossip? And then, okay, and what's been going on further afield? Has anyone arrived with news from elsewhere? And then once they've sort of filled the world with the reality stories, then they'll start to swap folk tales and tell tales of the culture, basically. These are the familiar tales of who we are, and how we live and all those things. And then the folk tales get into the wonder tales, where those are the deeper tales saying something more fundamental about who we are and what we are, not just cultural, but, humanity. And then they start telling the myths. And then finally, if anyone's still awake, they tell the creation story.
Mm.
And so this is the steps, the rungs of the ladder to the moon.
Mm.
It's a natural process. If you leave
Mm.
people chatting long enough, um, with nothing out, no other distractions to it, then this is what tends to emerge. And so the ultimate stories are those upper levels, which
Mm.
really reveal deeper meaning. But there's nothing wrong with sharing the folk tales, which are kind
Mm.
of quite simple and funny, and all the rest of it. There's nothing wrong with sharing the local news from the day,
Yeah.
But these days, the storytelling world has kind of moved into, with the kind of true story movement, the moth
Mm.
and all the rest of it that's copied it, has been moving into just kind of true anecdotes. And
Mm.
that's interesting. It can be
Mm.
funny, it can done really well, but it's on that reality level,
Mm.
which is not revealing much meaning. It's just kind of
Yeah. So
personal
it doesn't
experience.
take us into the deeper levels of consciousness, I guess. And when you were saying that, I was thinking, even in society, in conversation, our conversations don't go much beyond, the weather or, the things that are going on in our immediate environment. So we as a society are not even going into that other levels of consciousness. I really
Yeah.
love that. That's beautiful. Thank you, Ben Haggerty. Hope to have him on
And that's what
sometime too.
storytellers are. That's what I think. The
Mm.
storytellers are the people who go around reminding and doing it
Mm.
for, take them deeper.
Yeah.
Otherwise, who else will do it?
Yeah, that is beautiful. I really love it. So do you have any advice for storytellers who are just starting out? Obviously, you've done a lot of courses and things, so you've probably got like a
Mm.
top 5 advice things or something.
Well, there's I I would say my approach to teaching storytellers, as I said earlier on, is try to be yourself. Um, That's a demanding thing. It takes a bit of adventurous spirit. It takes the ability or the willingness to play, even when people are watching you.
Mm.
If you try and teach storytelling like an acting job where you've got to learn lines, you must remember the lines right. And those really nice words that you got out of that book, you must remember. Oh, I keep on forgetting it. And what is that bit? All of that anxiety is coming from the literary world,
Mm.
not the oral. That's not how the oral tradition works. The oral tradition is that you know a story just in bare bones, and you know kind of what happens. And of course, that you learn that as well, but it's not very much, especially if you're imagining it vividly. But then you explore and express the story with your own words as it comes out of you and as the audience draws the words out of you. You know, little kids will draw different words out of you than adults and so on. But just allowing yourself to be free and playful and uh, just not self-conscious by being immersed in the story.
Mm.
That's not a professional tip, more just how to be.
Mm.
And of course, to it, and you've got to actually do it and practice. It's not enough to listen to me and understand the
Mm.
words,
Mm.
because we've got such strong instincts to protect ourselves against
Mm.
embarrassment. But in terms of getting to be telling stories, you can start off just by not stopping telling stories. There was a chap called Brother Blue, very, very famous in America, in New York. And he was a very kind of marvelous person, kind of half crazy, maybe completely crazy, who knows? But he used to dress in blue. He used to stand around on the street corners in New York. Was it Brooklyn or Harlem or something? Can't remember. He was a black guy, but it was rough neighborhoods, and he would just stand on the street corner and start telling stories. And people would think, this guy is crazy. What's going on? But they would gather around and they would listen. All these tough people, they would be drawn in as well. So there's never a lack of opportunity, and you've got to put in the work to explore what happens. But in terms of getting to be a sort of thriving as a storyteller, um, I'm skipping out a lot of steps really here, but you do have you do have to understand what you are for. We've talked a bit about, what the meaning and the kind of role of a storyteller is in a way, but what do other people think you're for? And that's much harder. As a storyteller, you run a business. You have to get money in, you have to sell something, it has to work. And that's something most people are not trained in. They don't know how business works and so on. 90% of every business is the same as 90% of every other. You still got to get money, you still got to reach people, you still got to persuade them that your offer is great. Still got to keep the books, it's all there for everybody. But most storytellers' idea of what their business is of a business model, and a business model is how your business works. The business model of the storyteller is usually a very well-worn one called the starving artist. And that's the problem. A lot of storytellers are starving artists, or semi-starving, but it's you don't have to run your business like that. What that means is, if you're a plumber or a hairdresser, you could just go out into the world, you could put out an advert, put up a flyer or something and say, I do plumbing, I do hairdressing. And some people will see that and say, oh, I need that. Yeah. Can I hire you? Can I get that from you? They know it, they understand it, they have a strong need. When your hair is kind of falling over your eyes, you need somebody to do something about it. So nobody is waking up in the night and saying, oh no, help, I need a storyteller.
Wouldn't that be great though if they did?
I'm looking forward to the day, but so you've got to realize that people don't understand their need for you, but they might have a need for you. But what are they getting from you as a storyteller? Now, if you're just thinking of yourself as an artist, think, I love stories, I want everybody else to love stories, I'm just going to tell stories at them until they love it too, then you're going to struggle, because you're the one with the love of stories, other people not so immersed. But why would they want stories? And this is my tip. Look at the value you have for other people, but look at it deeply. Don't be just blinded by your own viewpoint of what storytelling is, because that's not what your audience's view is, unless they're storytellers as well. In which case you have a very small audience and not much money, because they can't pay you either. But you've got to think, right, what do I do for people? And we talked a little while ago about storytelling creating community. This is a big thing that I feel is really a kind of strong talent for storytellers. So if you were to say to the world, do you need community? Are you struggling to pull people together? Are you struggling to get people on the same side? Do you have people who are squabbling and factional fighting and political infighting and stuff? Do you want a nice atmosphere at your party where everyone's kind of joined together, or your team at work is kind of on the same page? Well, I can come in and do that for you. How do you do that? Oh, I've got this secret weapon, You wouldn't believe what it is. You'll never guess what it is. Oh, well, does it work? Oh, yeah, straight away, like instant. Well, yeah, that sounds like it's worth, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe. Yeah, can I pay you now? Suddenly you're not a starving artist. So it's you've got to look at how other people might experience you and why they might like that. And it's not just community, they might like it for entertainment, for sure, but entertainment is low paid usually, unless you're, Beyonce or something. And I know that this kind of competes against the idea of I am an artist, I just follow my inspiration and I just let it flow out of me. but which is great, and you can do that if you've got another income, but somewhere you've got to live, So how are you going to be that inspiring to people who don't know about storytelling? And how do you get in the door?
There's some great questions there, some really good things to think about, not only for me, but hopefully for people who are listening as well. So we're coming to the end of the time together now. Just wanted to know where people could find you and all the projects that you're involved in.
Yeah. Well, my main website is timsheppard.co.uk. And the Sheppard is spelt with a double P-A, as you'll see in a link, I expect. But also, I've got a couple of projects that I'm sort of floating at the moment. And if people ask me enough, I'll probably do it much quicker than if they don't. But one of the things I want to teach storytellers is how to thrive, what I've just been saying, because I believe that storytellers have a gift of communication, which is sadly lacking and sadly impersonal in the business world. But storytellers don't use it to build their business because they use it on stage instead, and only on stage. Storytellers have got brilliant skills that can be used, and that storytelling mindset can really work to build a very heartfelt business. So it's something I've got in mind to teach a course in that. It's not quite sort of solid in my mind yet, but if people want to bully me into doing it, I'll do it. And the other one is that sort of lost language of symbolism that I've been working on digging up out of the past. And it's been so exciting and rewarding for me that I feel some other people should be excited by it. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but
no, I'll be excited with you. I'm excited with you. Could we expect a book about the symbolism?
Gosh, well, it's quite tricky. It's not like there's a dictionary that you can just say this means that, and therefore you understand it. It's more a question of there are things that get symbolized, and there's a variety of symbols that get used for that. Varies a bit across culture. But then there's also the kind of the bigger picture of the meaning and the wisdom and the mysteries that are being communicated to you. And you've got to have a bit of that bigger picture, the map in your head, before you can start making sense of what the symbols are trying to tell you and why they're in that place rather than somewhere else. So it's quite a demanding little sort of reorientation. It's not about just kind of random images emerging out of your subconscious and just catching on because they sort of feel interesting. That does happen in a kind of very, in other fields. But those stories that have these continuous, reliable stories and symbols that lasted for thousands of years, they have a purpose behind them, Anyway.
It's World Storytelling Day.
Yeah. Well, that happens every 20th of March. The whole world of storytelling gets together, agrees a theme. We do that in the autumn, well, our autumn, sort of September, October. And so everybody in the world who wants to can tell a story on that theme and spread the idea that storytelling is here. And, it's a big thing. So yes, I run that, and there's a page for that on my website. Well,
thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much from you. You've got a lot of knowledge and wisdom to share, and I really appreciate your time and your just openness in able to answer my questions.
No, thank you so much.
Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.